Going to start this evening's breaking news for you because Chris Eubank Jr against Conor Benn will be broadcast on Sky Sports box office. The fight, dubbed Fatal Fury, will take place on April the 26th at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Let's go live to Las Vegas and join Andy Scott. Good to see you, Andy. If you can tear yourself away from poolside for just a moment for us, that would be wonderful. Look, you witnessed the press conference last time, didn't you, involving both the fighters. Can you remind us just how much is at stake here, though?
Well, it's difficult to put a figure on it, isn't it? The legacy of the two names alone, Eubank and Benn, the two fathers, Nigel and Chris, were locked in that rivalry many moons ago now. And I think for a long time people felt that the weight difference between the two sons, Chris and Conor, would be too great. But here we are in 2025, and in April we will see it finally. Chris Eubank Jr and Conor Benn will lock horns. If the press conferences are anything to go by, I mean, it's going to be explosive. There's a huge amount of bad blood between the two for a number of different reasons. They don't like each other anyway, and I think Eubank Benn, you're never going to get on. But obviously there was the reasons behind the cancellation first time around back in October 2022 when Conor Benn failed pre-fight drugs tests and the fight was cancelled. And now we've all seen the pictures, haven't we? They finally got it on, and when they came face to face, Chris Eubank Jr had a carefully pre-planned attack on Conor Benn when he smashed an egg on the side of his head. That's cost him £100,000, which is an eye-watering amount of money, but it kind of did the job that Chris Eubank Jr wanted it to do, because it went around the world, didn't it? I don't think I've ever seen so many clips from a single face-off or head-to-head, and it's got everybody talking, so it's had the desired effect. In the ring itself, they're probably different fighters with different styles. I think that's fair to say. Eubank Jr is naturally the bigger man who's campaigned around middleweight and super middleweight his whole career. Conor Benn stepping up in weight from 147, but he has had a couple of fights at 154, and there is also this hotly debated rehydration clause as well, which means that Chris Eubank Jr can't put on more than 10 pounds in the 24 hours after the weigh-in. So it's very, very intriguing. But to answer your first question, everything's at stake for these two. For the winner, I mean, they can move on, can't they? I think we think it's a two-fight deal, but for the loser, it's unthinkable. You do not want to be in that position, I would say. I don't think Chris Eubank Jr could live with losing to Conor Benn, and I don't know how Conor Benn is going to live with losing to Chris Eubank Jr.
Yeah, and Andy, you know well, we sometimes have to hype up a fight, don't we, here on Sky Sports? We don't need to hype this one up at all. These two, as you mentioned, for all those reasons, their father's rivalry as well back in the 90s, for all those reasons, these two really don't like each other, and this should be a great fight, shouldn't it?
I think you're right. I think there are a number of rivalries that we've done through the years that you feel that when all is said and done, they will shake hands and probably be great friends. You just don't get that impression with these two for all of the reasons that you listed. Yes, the legacy of the names and the fathers, but if you think about how much time went into that first fight and time that was wasted ultimately, that they can't get back, with all of the mud that's been thrown from both sides, now with the two press conferences that were explosive. I think we've all sat down and watched the two of them on Piers Morgan as well. There are so many layers to this. They don't like each other for obvious reasons, and I don't think they're ever going to be on each other's Christmas cards lists. But the best way to sort a rivalry like this, the best way to settle it is in the ring, isn't it? That's where ultimately it will be settled in April at that magnificent Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I can't think of a bigger rivalry in British boxing. You could argue AJ Fury if one day they decide to do it, but Benn Eubank will be synonymous with the fans of their fathers, but also with the modern day fans of Chris and Conor as well. So it really does span a couple of generations. It really does have everything. And I think actually, more than anything, for all of that I've said, the fight itself, Conor Benn is ferocious and Chris Eubank Jr is explosive. So what a powder keg.
Should be indeed. I would say have a nice day, but I think that's a given what you've got behind you. Enjoy yourself. Thanks, Andy. Let's now speak to Matt Macklin, who I dare say hasn't got a pool behind him, to get your thoughts. No, as I thought. Matt, always good, lovely to see you. Look, let's start with this one. The rivalry between these two is pretty epic, isn't it? We've seen a bit of bad blood already. What do you make of these two?
Yeah, I think it's a natural rivalry, like you say. I think that stems from the rivalry between their fathers. You know, Benn Eubank was just the biggest rivalry ever in my. I remember growing up, getting into boxing. I was probably 8 years old when they fought the first time up the road from me at the NEC in Birmingham in 1990, and I just remember everybody talking about that fight. I mean, they were both, superstars, and I guess because they had each other. You need a dance partner in boxing, and they had each other, and they couldn't have been more different personalities, different fighting styles. So they were literally the perfect rivals.
Matt, who do you think's got the better so far of these early exchanges? Who do you think's got the upper hand, if either?
I mean, I think Chris Eubank Jr. has achieved his purpose. He has riled Conor Benn. He's irritated him. He's got him to lose his temper. He's definitely winning the one-upmanship, if that's what you want to call it. Here we see him just kind of goading him in, luring him into a full sense of security, setting him up for the egg smash. And then, of course, Conor naturally, who's quite an emotional, kind of high energy guy anyway, loses his head, temper completely gone, probably feels like Eubank's tried to mug him off publicly as well. And he's just lost it. So I think Eubank Jr. has achieved his purpose. But at the same time, I think it probably works for Conor Benn too, because he's that type of personality. He wants to be fired up. I think he uses the anger and the disdain for Eubank to really motivate him, to push him in training, and I guess, push him through the hard rounds of a fight.
No, you know what it's like, the pressure of these fights, particularly in the build-up to it. Is it the person that handles that the best we'll see the best version of in terms of going into that fight?
Yeah, very much so. We say regularly on Sky when we're commentating on boxing, when people on their ring walks, it's all about having the fire in the belly but ice in the mind, because you need that passion. You need to know this is the biggest fight of your life, everything, what it means to you, to motivate you, to dig deep, to rise, to raise your game to the standard. But also, you can't allow that to overwhelm you and run away with yourself and get too emotional, get too invested, because one, you'll burn up a load of energy. Two, you won't make the right decisions. And it's all about just staying cool, calm and collected and composed amongst the chaos.
Matt, where will this rank, do you think? Because we love a British grudge match, don't we? And the fact that it is at Tottenham Stadium as well. Could this be one of the biggest ever fights, do you think, we've seen in terms of fights on British soil?
No, not in terms of the wider landscape, the significance in the boxing world. I mean, you've had, two Brits fighting for world titles, Lewis Bruno, Ben Eubank, the fathers fighting for world titles both times. Watson, Eubank, Watson, Ben, even recent times, AJ Dubois, the heavyweight championship of the world was on the line. So, this doesn't have that sort of level of significance in the wider boxing landscape. But what it does have is name recognition, huge profile, massive media attention. Both guys, they've got huge profiles. Everyone wants to see this fight, which does stem from the natural rivalry of both their fathers. So in terms of, media attention and the capacity and people tuning in to watch it on television, talking about it, hype, etc., then I would say it is right up there with any fight we've ever seen, definitely.
Matt, we had Harlem Eubank in the studio yesterday, and he said this is a mismatch. He was just sort of obviously telling us that Eubank's going to win it as well, Eubank Jr. But how much of an impact will that weight limit have on this fight, do you think?
It could be significant. I understand where Harlem Eubank is coming from. I think if this fight was a few years ago, I'd have probably agreed with him. But Father Time is undefeated, and Eubank Jr. hasn't looked as good in recent performances as what he did a few years back. Naturally, he gets old, and the young man, the athletic attributes that he had, which served him so well, his chin, his stamina, they were probably his two best assets. Obviously, they dwindle as you get older, and I don't think his punch resistance is what it was, and naturally his stamina won't be what it was. And also coming down in weight, going up in weight, coming back down to weight, making 160 pounds, the middleweight limit, I think will really hurt Chris Eubank Jr. at this stage of his career and of his life.
Okay, interesting. Just finally then, who wins it for you?
Timing is key, I think, in the fight. There's lots of unknowns. One being Ben, can he carry the power up to middleweight? He's had a couple of fights up at super welterweight, the weight between welterweight and middleweight, and he hasn't, it hasn't been as dynamic. And Eubank Jr., what has he got left? These are two, we don't really know the answers to these. So I think you've got to say Eubank Jr. is a pretty strong favourite. But I was speaking to Nigel Benn at the press conference at Tottenham Hotspur, and I thought I better not sit around him too long because his confidence, he was that confident that he almost swayed me. He's very infectious when you've got someone totally believing in themselves or their son, who cannot see any other way but them winning. It can be, like I say, contagious, infectious, whatever. So I think, look, cold light of day, I think you've got to say Eubank Jr. is the favourite.